Welcome at the University of Antwerp. We are going to start the day, a day of reflection, debate and lectures. So I'm looking forward to it. But first I'd like to give the floor to our Dean, Professor Koen Vandenbempt.
Okay, good morning everyone. I was told to do the introduction in Dutch. Dus ik ga dat ook doen zo, ja. But I will like to welcome our international guest speakers first, yes. And you have to endure, yes, a little bit of Dutch.
Ik zeg, u mag gewoon spreken.
Ik mag gewoon spreken. Oké, ja, dankjewel. Oké, van harte welkom iedereen. Van harte welkom op het jaarlijks congres van het Fonds voor Cultuurmanagement van de Universiteit Antwerpen. En welkom niet enkel op dit congres, maar natuurlijk op de Universiteit van Antwerpen. En ik wou zeggen, zoals je hierboven hebt kunnen zien, in deze mooie historische gebouwen. Ja, u begrijpt met al de zon buiten dat we ergens een lokaal moesten hebben waar de verleidingen niet te groot waren om de tuin op te zoeken, maar toch bij de les te blijven. Dames en heren, jullie weten dat het Fonds van Cultuurmanagement opgericht is en al meer dan 20 jaar geleden om een reflectie en het debat over cultuur, cultuurbeleid en het management van cultuur te stimuleren vanuit een Vlaams-Nederlands perspectief. En als decaan van de Faculteit Bedrijfswetenschappen en Economie, waar in de Universiteit Antwerpen bijvoorbeeld de opleiding Cultuurmanagement zit onder onze faculteit, ben ik dan ook zeer vereerd om jullie te mogen verwelkomen. Het fonds, dat weten jullie ook of weten jullie niet, heeft diverse activiteiten, waaronder dit congres, maar eigenlijk deelt ook prijzen uit. En alternerend is dat een prijs voor een scriptie of een prijs voor een doctoraal proefschrift. En dit jaar is het jaar van het proefschrift. En dat gebeurt in samenwerking met NCAT, moeilijke naam, het Europees Netwerk voor Opleidingen Cultuurmanagement, en wordt in dit najaar uitgereikt, niet vandaag. Het fonds zorgt er eigenlijk ook voor, in samenwerking met de Vlaamse overheid, dat er een prijs wordt gegeven voor cultureel ondernemerschap. En in het bijzonder wil ik graag ook de steun van Thomas Leijzen vermelden voor dit fonds en zijn activiteiten sinds vele jaren. Maar ook even een inleiding naar het thema van vandaag. En het thema vandaag is volgens mij ook wel bijzonder interessant. U ziet het hier, artistieke autonomie, bestaat zoiets wel? In de eerste zin van de programmabrochure die jullie ook hebben gekregen, lees dan ook: artistieke autonomie is een belangrijk thema omdat het de kern vormt van de artistieke vrijheid van kunstenaars en de integriteit van hun werk. Dat is wel heel wat natuurlijk. En ik vind dat op zich wel interessant, want de parallel naar de academische wereld is eenvoudig te maken. Academische autonomie of academische vrijheid is een zeer groot thema. Ja, is een zeer groot thema binnen ook deze universiteit en bij uitbreiding de wetenschappelijke wereld. En de vergelijking gaat nog verder, denk ik. Ook academici maken steeds meer deel uit van een ecosysteem. Ja, waar ze eigenlijk moeten omgaan met diverse stakeholders. En die stakeholders hebben nog eens allemaal andere verwachtingen. Dus het is een thema dat wel interessant is. En wat een vaststelling is dat de academische vrijheid, net zoals de artistieke vrijheid waarschijnlijk, zijn grenzen of meer grenzen heeft gekregen. Ja, en of dat goed of slecht is, dat gaan jullie misschien ook wel debatteren vandaag. Maar voor mij is dat een gegeven bijna. En vanuit mijn academische wereld wilde ik dan wat reflecties maken. En misschien zijn er dan ook wel wat parallellen te trekken naar de artistieke wereld. Mijn eerste reflectie is, er is niet aan te ontsnappen. Ja? En dat is nogal negatief uitgedrukt, maar dat bedoel ik helemaal niet. Maar het feit dat onze stakeholders een veel grotere impact hebben op onze wereld en ons werk, zowel academisch als artistiek, is volgens mij een feit. Maar het goede nieuws is dat is ook wederzijds. Hè. En dat betekent dus ook dat wij een impact hebben op het ecosysteem waar dat we in zitten. En de vraag die zich dan stelt, en waarschijnlijk ook wel beantwoord zal worden vandaag, of toch het debat daar rond, beseffen we dit voldoende? Ja? En kunnen we hiermee omgaan op een effectieve wijze? Ten tweede, tweede bedenking, de oorsprong van de academische vrijheid, en dat is misschien wel verschillend met de artistieke vrijheid, gaat terug naar het feit dat men wetenschappelijk onderzoek niet wou beïnvloeden door religieuze aspecten. Heel veel teruggaan in de tijd. En soms vergeten we dat wel eens. En dan wordt academische vrijheid, en misschien ook wel artistieke vrijheid, maar zeker academische vrijheid, wel te veel gezien als academische vrijblijvendheid. Ja? Je mag ons niet beïnvloeden. Wij zitten een beetje in Disneyland. Alles kan. En laat ons met rust. Met andere woorden, we hebben nood aan een goede omschrijving. En ik denk dat dat ook geldt voor artistieke autonomie en artistieke vrijheid. Wat bedoelen we hier eigenlijk mee? Het dekt zoveel ladingen dat wanneer dat we dat niet goed definiëren, ja, het eigenlijk een containerterm wordt waar je alles kan insteken en eigenlijk terug naar de vrijblijvendheid gaan. Het werken in een ecosysteem, dat is de derde dan, met diverse stakeholders, betekent ook dat ons werk en onze leefwereld meer hybrid worden. Het is niet meer zwarte koffie, daar is echt daar is melk ingevallen, dus het wordt meer hybrid. En dat betekent ook dat we op een andere manier vorm moeten geven. Een deel van ons werk, of dat nu academisch is of meer artistiek, kunnen we misschien zelf nog volledig bepalen. Ja. Maar een ander deel moet afgestemd worden en zal een andere invulling gaan krijgen. Of dat dan omwille van economische redenen is of politieke sturing, vind ik minder belangrijk. Dat heeft een grote impact natuurlijk. Maar dat betekent ook dat wij als academici, en ik denk dat dat voor kunstenaars hetzelfde is, of de artistieke wereld, toch heel andere vaardigheden moeten gaan aanleren om hiermee om te gaan. Ja? En hier zitten we dan, dat is niet eenvoudig, want dat betekent dat we ook moeten veranderen. Maar ik denk wel dat we veel meer, zowel jullie als in de academische wereld, veel meer vrijheidsgraden hebben dan we zelf denken. En die moeten we dan ook ten volle benutten. Ten slotte, ik vind ook wel dat het debat en het feit dat we in een ecosysteem zitten met veel stakeholders, dat veel implicaties heeft. Zowel voor het individu, de academici, de kunstenaar, maar ook het collectief. Wat het collectief dan in het artistieke is iets moeilijker te definiëren dan waarschijnlijk in het academische. Ik denk als individu gaan we veel meer focus moeten hebben. Ja? Focus en helder hebben wat ons doel is. En dat gaat ons ook scherp zetten. Maar voor het collectief en voor de academische wereld bijvoorbeeld betekent dit ook dat de universiteit... Er is veel meer nood aan visie. Ja? Er is veel meer nood aan visie. Hoe kunnen we academische vrijheid verzekeren en toch veel meer verankerd zijn in het ecosysteem? En ik denk dat dat niet anders is in de artistieke wereld. Ja? En een sterke visie, of de nood tot visie, is altijd veel hoger wanneer dat de wereld verandert. Zolang dat we in een stabiele wereld zitten, waar dat alles kan, is visie minder nodig. Ik denk dat dat nu meer nodig is, maar daar gaan jullie het vast ook wel over hebben. Dus afsluitend, dames en heren, nog eens dank voor uw aanwezigheid. Geniet ook van de netwerkmomenten natuurlijk. Zorg dat je geïnspireerd raakt door elkaar, door de sprekers. En ik wens u een fantastische dag toe. Dank u.
Hartelijk dank voor alvast deze boeiende aftrap en boeiende ideeën, parallellen. Wij gaan starten nu met de keynote-sprekers. En ja, inderdaad, wat het taalgebruik betreft hebben we naar een compromis gezocht. Dus we are very happy to welcome two of our keynote speakers, English-speaking keynote speakers. And therefore, it will be a mix of the English language and the Dutch language. So the keynotes will be in English, and then the panel discussion will be in Dutch. Also, maybe because it's a sensitive topic, so I think you can express yourself better when it is in your mother language. So, but thank you already for your understanding. Okay. So yeah, as a first speaker, we are happy to introduce Lara Staal. Lara Staal is an artist, but she's also a curator and program maker and dramaturg. She works at NT Gent, Frascati, Das Theater, and she's also member of the Transitiebureau. So she has a Dutch-Flemish profile. That's very interesting always. And she is also a very critical thinker. So that's the reason why we invited her. So Lara, I'd like to give you the floor.
Thank you, Annie.
There you are. I was looking.
Good morning, everyone. I must say I have to adapt a bit at this setting that I kind of disappear here in this screen. I would have loved to be more here and make contact with you, but the technique asked me to really stay here because of the volume, so I'll do my job. So thank you for this invitation. Yes, I prepared a text. Let's see where it brings us. And here I have, at some moment, some images. So the discussion in the Netherlands around art and autonomy is quite polarized. I can already tell you exactly who would defend art's autonomy from what is often felt as an increasing politicized interest in or demand from art. I know their gender, color, and age, and yes, that says something, and cannot help but look at them as fish who suddenly find themselves outside of the water, gasping for air. Nevertheless, the discussion about art and how autonomous it is or should be is relevant, and I've learned a lot from the defenders of so-called free art. I've read their books and I understand some of their concerns. But I cannot help but feel that their attitude is reactionary. They're trying to hold on to something that is slipping through their fingers. Free art, by the way, can be a confusing term, as both sides of this argument tend to claim they are for freedom. But when I speak about defenders of free art, I mean those who feel limited in what they can do in their artworks because of potential critique coming from political and social perspectives. In 1862, a debate on art and the state unfolded in the House of Representatives in the Netherlands that would become legendary. The main protagonist was the Liberal Minister of the Interior, Jan Roelof Thorbecke. And the words he spoke are still regularly quoted today. Art is not a government affair. The government is not a judge of science and art. Let's see if this works. It's already there, sorry. I didn't pay attention. In 2005, artist Jonas Staal, who yes, also happens to be my brother, made a work around politician Geert Wilders. Staal made a series of 21 installations that consisted of a collage with photos of the ultranationalist politician Geert Wilders, attached to trees, accompanied by a framed picture, a teddy bear, candles, and white roses. The installations reference the enormous memorial installations constructed after two murders of Dutch critics of Islam, namely the conservative liberal politician Pim Fortuyn and the polemicist and filmmaker Theo van Gogh. I remember very vividly how a Dutch politician was asked by a journalist what he thought about the Geert Wilders works, and he answered, "I find it tasteless, but shouldn't art be tasteless?" I thought that was the smartest diplomatic answer of the year. Or maybe the most cowardly? I'm still not sure. Because why should we artists make work if politicians don't feel they can respond? Why would we artists ask questions, organize provocative parades in the street, paint utopias, or talk about oppressed histories in our theaters if in the end the political realm, under the pretext of art's autonomy, doesn't want to interact with the ideas, content, or form? I already hear you think. Provocative parades, painted utopias, oppressed histories. What a narrow way of thinking about what art can be or do. Of course, I am aware that there are many art forms that are less direct in their political position, but that doesn't mean they are examples of autonomous art. Also, artists who deliberately strive for freedom of speech, like comedians, or for beauty in choreography, or for emotions in music, for example, cannot keep the political outside. Every art practice sees itself confronted with political realities the moment it becomes public. Who is the audience that can reach the artwork, and who cannot? What are the thresholds, financial thresholds, for entry? And even before art becomes public, practice needs space, a studio, a rehearsal room, a workshop. Where is the workspace situated? In which neighborhood? How much does it cost? Who pays? And who cleans? Last but not least, art practices need support. Financial resources, either private or subsidized, are never free from context. State money will demand certain requirements. Private money is not always gained in a fair or sustainable way. So the simple fact that art is always dependent of financial resources that always come with certain interests or conditions make it impossible to hold on the idea of pure autonomy. So the answer to the conference question is no. The autonomy of art doesn't exist. However, this does not mean that we should completely discard the concept of autonomy. It emerges as a result of the emancipation from religious institutions and financial elites. Patronage in the European context, especially due to the French Revolution, changes. It is no longer the patron commissioning art, but the state takes over. Artists then are not bound to the ruling class of monarchs and aristocracy, but became dependent on the state. And this dependency was a consciously chosen dependency of a state they fought for and helped found. It made it possible for artists to establish relative autonomy. This relative autonomy meant that artists had more leverage in negotiating the terms of dependency. For instance, women could now be accepted into art schools, and artists were given commissions who were not inducted into monarchy. The dependency of artists on the state spawned relative autonomy in negotiating with, for, and to whom the art they made would then belong to. This relative autonomy allowed a critical position for the first time. And this treatment of this relative autonomy, the treatment of this relative autonomy varies depending on the context. As a Dutch person, I observe how the legacy of Thorbecke has led to the isolation of art from society. Artists may be subversive and critical, but their impact has diminished, as art is seen as, oh well, it's only art, and shouldn't art be tasteless, provocative, subversive? However, the moment art really does become political, like in the case of my brother, he had to spend 2 days in jail and was brought to court. That's the second image you see at my right. Or another example is artist Quincy Gario and his art project Zwarte Piet is Racisme, Black Piet is Racism, who would go to a St. Nicholas parade with a t-shirt that said Black Piet is Racism and was very violently treated and removed by the police. It seems that politicians often like to see a certain kind of art that feigns subversiveness without challenging real systemic issues. The moment artists ignore that, it is quickly treated as no longer art, as seen as a direct threat, sedition, propaganda. Quincy Gario was constantly called an activist and not an artist anymore, for example. We live in complex times. We heard it already in the introduction talk. We live in complex times. It's a post-9/11 society. Populist politics are dominating everywhere. The crisis in offering asylum and the way refugees are treated is against all human rights. Despite the huge impact of the Black Lives Matter movement, we are still confronted with all kinds of forms of exclusion. There's a war in Ukraine, and the influence of climate change is inevitable and happening everywhere around us. And it is in this highly politicized context that the romantic notion of art autonomy feels completely estranged to me. In our current context, it seems very logical to still choose for art forms that depart from the idea of art as a free space, as it has become unavoidably clear that this freedom always happens at the expenses of others. Today's society is built on so many forms of unfairness that it seems to me that every art practice will have to somehow be able to position themselves in relation to that. To give an example, several comedians in the Netherlands oppose what they call the woke culture because they feel it limits their freedom. These comedians are all male and white, which you surely agree can no longer be seen as a coincidence. They feel they are being censored because people have criticized female and friendly jokes, performed archetypical characters of color, or made fun of the LGBTQI+ community or people with disabilities. Just for the record, nobody is forbidding their work or asking them to change the content. The only difference is that people for whom those comedy shows apparently have never been made for, whose identities or positions have never been taken into account, are now talking back. Jokes are not always funny for everyone. And especially when your life requires you to fight every day for access to education, a job, for security, there's often a lot less to laugh about. Now, these voices finally feel safe enough to share what it does to them, because let's be honest, the so-called free space of art has never existed. What you say on stage and to whom always had consequences. But now these consequences are made much more visible. Maybe I take a sip of water to take a little pause. So, for 5 years, I have been working often in Flanders, currently as a house artist of Ghent. And here, I experience a different situation when it comes to the relation between art and politics. I experience it as a big relief. When I made a work with teenage school dropouts about the current educational system, there were many newspapers interested in our work. When in COVID times, I made a movie about minors fleeing Eritrea and Europe's asylum policy, the State Secretary for Asylum and Migration, Samim Hadi, was open for an interview with me in the Standaard and also came as a guest speaker for the public discussion. In the Netherlands, it is impossible to even get the attention of members of the parliament. It seems that in Flanders, what happens in museums, on the stages and in concert halls matters and regularly stirs public debate. At the same time, the proximity between politics and art in Flanders also causes friction. Board members who are mirroring the local politics in a city are not always happy when art becomes too outspoken about certain political issues. It reveals a lot about the blurry lines of the relatively autonomous position that art holds. Let me share 2 examples with you. The first comes from an institutional level and the second from the position of an artist. Recently, Kai Theater in Brussels came up with a Ramadan-friendly label. With this label, Kai Theater aims at making the performance evenings during the month of Ramadan more accessible for Muslim people. In this way, they want to facilitate the cultural experience of all Brussels residents, regardless of their religion. The label got critiqued by all sides. The Flemish Prime Minister, who is also Minister of Culture, Jan Jan Bon, was critical of the Ramadan-friendly initiative and thought religious interference in cultural artistic practice was problematic. Yusuf Kobo, opinion leader and founder of A Seat at the Table, an organization that helps disadvantaged young people enter the job market, thought it was paternalizing and creating the idea that Muslims desire labels on cultural houses. This is what the average Belgian will remember after this discussion, he worried. It seemed the label caused a lot of confusion and shows the sensitivity around the idea that art loses its freedom and autonomy. But which freedom exactly is lost, and according to whom? Theaters have adapted themselves for ages to Christian agenda where they don't program performances on Christmas, for example. How come this is not considered religious interference? Also, the artworks were presented exactly how the artist made them. Nothing of their content or form, nor the choice for certain artworks were adapted or changed because of Ramadan. The only thing Kai Theater invested in is the way it got contextualized. They made use of content warnings that warn against nudity, music, verbal and physical violence. Jabon responded by saying that this is meant to warn the audience, but it can also lead to a form of self-censorship among creators of culture. Well, culture should be there to excite, challenge and surprise. Jabon spoke of a somewhat paternalistic vision. Although nobody speaks of any censorship, the way something is contextualized already raises the fear for suppression and forbiddance. It is nice to read that Jan Jambon himself likes to be surprised by art, but not everyone has the same position in life, and seeing violence for someone who has experienced this regularly can be a very different kind of surprise. Why not make it possible for people to prepare themselves if that helps? Can't the people who like to be surprised not simply decide not to click on the trigger warning? The second example is again around censorship, but this time it is the artist that feels censored by the state. In September 2022, Ruud Lasters, one of Antwerp's 5 city poets, stepped down after a poem of hers was rejected. Yes. Lasters, who has been teaching in the classroom for more than 20 years, criticizes the Flemish education system that divides pupils into A and B categories in her poem Losgeld, Ransom. Lasters wrote the poem together with pupils from the Spectrum School in Deurne. The intention was to kick off the new school year with the poem, but the city informed Lasters that the poem would be rejected as a city poem. Lasters then decided to resign, and I quote, "When the city refuses even an educational poem that addresses discrimination against thousands of young people, it is obvious to me that the city poems serve purely as promotion for the city and not as an expression of culture or literature." Councillor of Culture A. Daoud responded, and I quote, "The freedom of every poet in the city is absolute. Every poet can and may write whatever he or she likes. But not every poem by a city poem is also immediately a city poem. Of course she may write whatever she wants, only this poem was not created in collaboration with the city, so we do not recognize and distribute it as a city poem. The city poetry aims to connect the city through poetry, bring people closer together through poems. We find too little of that in this poem." End of quote. Here we see a discussion, here we see a situation that maybe resembles a little bit the dependency of an artist used to have in times of patronage. You are invited as a city poet, but with a very clear task, namely to write poetry that connects, not criticizes. More and more we see how state subsidies, and in the Netherlands private funds, come with social demands and want projects to prove a certain impact. It becomes problematic when art is used to solve problems, because sometimes it mostly points at where it hurts and wants to address the people responsible. Both examples show how art is constantly negotiated between different actors in society, and that the space to be critical, or the way art is being contextualized, can raise a lot of resistance. Either way, art is never fully autonomous, and always rooted in certain ideologic positions and contexts in society. So somehow, we should acknowledge that the state of course influences the arts, and the arts of course provokes the status quo. My question is, how do we create a fruitful ground in which the political position of art is being negotiated? How can we develop a language in which we no longer hide behind the idea of autonomy, but we acknowledge how art is always under the influence of the political, even though it can, through its relative autonomy, still take in a critical position and push certain ideas and awarenesses? And how can we embrace the public debates certain art projects? How can we embrace the public debate certain art projects or institutions can provoke without trying to oppress the works or frameworks in which art is being presented? Maybe we could find a beginning of an answer in the idea of critical autonomy. Critical autonomy could both function as a term that criticized the idea of pure autonomy, as something it doesn't believe in. A term thus that acknowledges that art is always interdependent and in relation to all kinds of power structures and interests. At the same time, critical autonomy could be used as a term that advocates for the importance of criticality. A term that demands conditions in which art can be critical of its environment and the larger systems we operate in. Because without potential criticality, art becomes decoration, city marketing, or the mere affirmation of incumbency, current aesthetics, and implementation of other people's interests. Thank you.